Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Craig. I'm the Deputy Planning Director and really excited to see everyone here today and see all your faces on the screen. It's kind of exciting to be able to do this way. Apologize it took us a couple weeks to get this organized, but I'm really excited that we're able to convene the Ordinance Advisory Committee here today and really continue on with initiatives that are important for the Planning Department as well as for our entire city. There's a lot of things different now today than the last time we met. I think the last time we met, this was really just starting to hit Charlotte, and things are very different today. I've been on a lot of calls with folks just, understand what's happening in our community, what are things going to look like, and right now what we're seeing and hearing is that there's still construction activity, things are still, construction is going on right now. I have heard some that there may be just the lenders being occupied by some of the small business loans. We may see a little downtick in the near future, but we're expecting on the other side of this, it may look a little bit different, but Charlotte will still be a growing and important city here in our nation. So this initiative, the UDO, is important for that, to develop guidelines as to how we will grow. And so grateful to have everyone here today. We also have our consultants on the call as well. And so I will turn it over to Alan to kind of kick us off and get things started on our topic of discussion for today, as well as just some overall logistics about Zoom for those of y'all that some of you may feel like you're on Zoom several times a day, which is how I feel right now, but some others are probably may not have used a particular tool before. So just a couple housekeeping items too as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alan. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Allison. We've got a typical presentation, which I've...
Alan? Sorry, quickly. Tony?
Yeah, Tony will make
it. Apologies.
Oh, all good. Very quickly, I just want to all right.
He's muted.
Yeah, I just unmuted him.
Yeah, and my my video also stopped. I don't know what happened with that, but at least there we go. I can see myself. I don't know whether you all can see me. Anyway, I just want to thank everybody for doing this, and I like everyone, I've been scrambling over the past few weeks, wearing my DOT hat, especially working with the impact of the current situation on revenues, but it just reinforces for me the importance of continuing to go on with this effort and other efforts like this, because it's so important and we don't want to lose the momentum that we have. And I know that it's difficult to participate virtually, but I want to thank Laura and Alan and everybody on their team for pressing ahead and putting together all of the great slides that we're going to see today. And I want to thank all of you for taking time for possibly lengthy Zoom meeting today, but it's going to be a lot of good information. And so I commend it to you, and just thank and welcome everybody. And we will, although I think we do have an end of our process that we can see, I do am confident that we'll be able to get back together in person well before the end of this process. And so doing this is a good way to bridge and keep going and keep our momentum. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to start, I'm going to share my screen. I'll be controlling the presentation, the slides for today's meeting. So let me get that called up, and hopefully very soon you should be able to see a slide on your screen that says welcome. We are glad you're here. I'll echo what Allison and Tony have said, and thank you all for joining us. It looks like we've got a very good turnout this morning. I know that by now, probably most of you have had some form of meetings or family chats or friend chats virtually using one of the platforms that are available. If you haven't used Zoom though, the next few slides will just walk through some of the features of Zoom that will help you get the most out of this meeting. The participants are, well, I'll get to that in a minute. So you can choose which view you prefer to see on your screen. I call it the Brady Bunch view. That kind of ages me. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you can choose that as the gallery view, or you can choose the speaker view, which I believe will just focus and show you the person speaking. However, most of this meeting will have a slide on your screen, so the view you choose may not matter all that much at this point. You can go between full screen by choosing the icon shown in the upper right, or you can get out of full screen by choosing another icon or pressing the escape button on your keyboard or double clicking on the screen. If you haven't done this already, I would recommend clicking on that participants icon at the bottom of your screen, and that will open up a panel on the right-hand side showing who's in the meeting, and you should be able to scroll down and see the various people that have joined us. When we get to a point in the meeting, and there will be points in the meeting where we'll stop and ask for questions or comments, I hope you'll be able to see a button somewhere on the right-hand side of your screen that says raise hand. So we'll get to that in a minute. But when we ask for comments or questions, we'll ask people to raise their virtual hand, and we will call on people and unmute you and hear your comments and questions, and hopefully we'll take those in the order that hands have been raised. If you're having problems with audio, there's a little up arrow at the lower left-hand side of your screen that will open up some audio controls. I won't pretend to understand exactly what to tell you to do if you're having problems. I know that I've had some luck just playing around with some of those settings to kind of maximize my audio on my computer. Here's a big one. Some of you may have called in and you're showing up in the list of participants as just a phone number. So we'll ask you, if you don't see your name listed, but you recognize the phone that you may be calling in, you can hover over that phone number and go to the More blue button, and then click on the Rename, and you can rename yourself. We'll ask you to do that and type in your name so that we'll know who you are and not just by your phone number. I'm also told that if you can find yourself on the screen, you can do it there, but since we have slides on the screen, you probably won't be able to do that. I'd like to mention that we are recording this meeting, and we will upload it to the Charlotte UDO YouTube channel in 1 or 2 days, depending on how long it takes us to get that recording and get it uploaded to our YouTube page. If you haven't visited that, I recommend that all the OAC committee members subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be using that more and more as we proceed in lieu of the Facebook recordings that we had been doing. So let me just go over a couple of things on the procedures of how we'll proceed with this meeting. We will go through a presentation just as if we were in our meeting room here on the 8th floor, and I am on the 8th floor now. Kevin and I are both in the office to make sure that we have good connectivity for this meeting. We'll narrate the presentation. We'll stop at a couple of points, and we'll open the floor for questions. At that point, we'll ask you to raise your virtual hand, and then between Laura and I and the rest of our staff who are on board as meeting hosts, co-hosts, we'll answer your questions. Hopefully we'll get through them all and move on to our next section in the presentation. So because we can't see everybody right now, make a note. If you have questions along the way, write them down, jot yourself a note so that when the time comes to ask them, you'll remember what they are. And then we'll ask you to raise your hand. And as I said, we'll call on people as we see them. I'm going to turn this over to Laura now to go through our process, go through our agenda. And Laura, if you're there, would you like to take over now?
Sure. I'm going to suggest that we can rename the people that have called in, and maybe we do that so everyone can see who is on. So what I'm going to do is just go through the phone numbers that I'm seeing, unmute each of you individually, and just I'm going to tell you what number I'm asking for. Wait a second. Let's see. Well, I'm having trouble doing this because when I unmute the person, they go away. 704-608. They have managed to rename themselves. I guess we got just a few more. Maybe not. Okay, hold on. Bear with me just a second. If your number is 704-493. Could you tell us who you are and we can rename you?
Yeah, this is Derek Dittner.
Okay. Alan, can you take care of renaming?
I can't because I'm sharing my screen with the slides now.
You can't, you're right, but I can. Okay.
Laura, I can help with that too.
Thanks. I think I can get this one.
Okay.
Apologies if I misspelled. The next one I have is 980.
Tracy Newsome.
Okay. Allison, you got that one?
Yep, got it.
Here. If there are any others that I can see on the list. Up, we got a few more. When I unmute you, you move to the top of the screen, and that seems probably 704-435. Sorry, I just lost that number.
704.
Maria Anderson.
Got it.
And just a few more, sorry. 704-608.
Nan Peterson.
Thank you. And 704-654.
Keith McVeigh.
Thank you, Keith. I think that should get everyone on here named. Okay, so we're going to jump on in now. Our agenda for today is to talk a little bit about where we are in the UDO process in light of COVID. Give you guys a quick update on the TOD text amendment. And then the bulk of our meeting is to talk about, do the follow-up on the uses, use definitions and listing that we began at our last meeting, tell you guys what we have done with the feedback, how we've approached that, and then talk about a few specific uses and then what's next. As we jump into the uses, just want to say thank you for everyone that gave us feedback. We looked at every comment that we received and have incorporated a number of changes in what we sent you guys yesterday. And then there are some times where we, for one reason or another, didn't make a change, but we're going to be following up individually with you guys if you submitted a comment and we didn't make a change, to let you guys know what our thinking was. And Alan, turning it over to you. Oh, maybe that's still me. A little harder to plan for these when we're not all in the office together. So we have obviously had to shift the way that we're working a little bit, but we are continuing to work as a staff, not just within planning, but across the city and even in other agencies outside of the city on moving forward. So we've gone obviously to all working remotely, and we're spending a lot of time working through things on calls and video conferences, just like this, using Zoom and WebEx. So far, we've seen minimal impact to the overall UDO schedule, so we're planning on continuing on as we were before, and we're really looking forward to when we can all be talking about this in person again, once it's safe to do so. Real quickly on TOD, you guys probably remember that we talked about this a number of meetings ago when then we had a drop-in meeting. And again, we want to thank everyone that provided feedback on TOD text amendment. Being finalized now, we expect to have the final version out next week. We will get that sent to you guys. We will have as part of the rezoning hearing, a virtual public hearing on this on May 18th and anticipating city council decision in June.
So before we move on to the next section of our presentation, let's pause here and we can take some questions. I'm going to stop sharing the presentation right now so we can see, so I can see people on the screen. So we'll just cover anything that we've gone over so far, any procedural questions you may have. If you're having any technical issues, maybe we can try to help you before we move on. And also, obviously, anything on what Laura's just talked about regarding how we're working, how we're proceeding going forward, anything on the TOD text amendment. And then once we get through these series of questions, if there are any, we'll move on to the UDO use matrix and use definitions. Okay, so if you do have a question, I know that we've gotten a comment already from someone that they could not find the raise hand button on their screen. So okay, do we have any hands being raised? I don't see any yet. Okay, I am not seeing any hands, at least virtual hands, on my screen. Maybe I'm missing any, but since so many of you are on cameras, if we've missed your hand being raised on our screen, then you can maybe raise your hand on your camera and we'll see you. If not, I am going to move on with the presentation. Laura, do you see anybody or no?
I do not.
Okay, very good then. We'll move on.
They say I didn't. Okay, just checking. One more
Winters.
time.
Dick Winters has a question.
Dick.
No, I just raised my hand.
Oh, okay. All right then. Well, we'll have another point in the presentation for questions. So if we missed you this time around, we'll get you the next time. So I will start sharing my screen again, and then we'll continue with the presentation. Thank you. All right. Laura, you're going to introduce this next slide, and then we will turn it over to Chris and Arista from Camiros.
Yes, we just, again, some of you guys may not have actually even met Arista and Chris from Camiros. Camiros is the consultant that is the lead on working on the UDO. And we have Arista Strungus and why am I blanking on Chris? And Chris's last name. And they are going to take us through kind of the approach that they used in developing the use list and definitions. And some of this will be follow-up on what we talked about at our last meeting about consolidation of uses, multiple uses into one definition and so forth. So I'm going to turn it over to Arista and Chris.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see everybody again, virtually, as it were. So one of the things we wanted to talk about, because we saw some of the comments that were coming through, staff has been great with sharing the comments that the OAC has been providing on the use definitions. That we're talking about consolidating uses, maybe there's too many uses listed here. Some have been general comments about consolidation, some have specifically looked at a couple of uses and maybe they can be brought together. And we have been keeping track of that and making note of that as we move forward. I think one of the things we wanted to share with everybody about this approach is that when we're looking at this initial set of uses, which does seem like a lot, but it's a lot less than the 541 that are currently scattered in the ordinance. And the intent here is to create more of a generic use approach. But in that approach, there are some uses that are still have to be specifically regulated because of their sensitivity or the impacts that they have. You can see one of them highlighted there on the screen, the adult uses, and we'll talk about those at the end of the presentation. And so our intent here is not to say this is the be-all, end-all of the use list. As you've kind of seen, as you'll see in this presentation, a few more uses needed to get added that kind of got missed. We don't want to make an excessive amount of uses, but we want to be safe in terms of the types of things we're regulating. So we don't do consolidations or eliminations really at this point, as we don't really have the full district structure yet. So we need to see, when you look at something, say amusement facility indoor versus amusement facility outdoor, there may be some districts that allow both of those, but some that only allow one, and some that may have prescribed conditions attached to that. When we get kind of closer to the end of this process, or at least when we've got the districts more fully fleshed out, we may see that some uses are always allowed together in the same place. That they're basically very similar, that they may have the same prescribed conditions attached to them, and in which case they do lend themselves to combination. Some uses may never may end up getting eliminated along the way because they never do get used within the ordinance. So our intent is this is a fluid use list. We are taking your suggestions to consolidate, kind of make it tighter very seriously, but it's really not at this point that it's appropriate to start doing that because we just don't know how the rest of the districts are going to end up being fleshed out. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything.
I think that was well said. You know, we realize that there's a tendency, and especially because we're, you know, the main goal here is a simplification and a clarification of uses, but at least at this point in the process, the tendency toward less is more is a little bit, it's a little bit too early on for that. We need to kind of have everything on the table so that, as Arista said, as we're moving through and we're actually assigning uses to districts and deciding where we want things to go and what conditions need to go on them, we need to be, you know, aware of everything that we're talking about, and actually having them as part of the use list now is kind of how we keep them in the front of our mind moving forward. That's all.
Consultants out.
Thank you. And someone, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute to maybe just make sure that we're all able to raise hands. One of our staff, one of our colleagues here just said that maybe because we've disabled a feature that people aren't able to raise hands. Can anybody tell me whether or not they can, and you can raise your hand on the camera and I can see you, whether or not you're able to find the raise hand button on the lower right of your screen? Warren, I see Warren can see it, so good. And Rebecca's shaking her head no. And Michelle can't see it either. Walter can see it. So some of you are able to see it, so at least it's not something that we've purposely done that disabled that. If you can't find it, I don't know, because I can't see your screen. I'm not sure how to help you, but if you can send.
Alan, another option is if they're not able to see that, if they can see the chat button, I think maybe click on that and then just provide your comment that way. So you're not distracted from your presentation. We can just pass that on.
Hey, Taiwo?
Yes.
This is Julie Eisel. The chat is disabled as well, but
Okay.
I am on an iPad, and if you click, you know, it says mute, start video, share content, participants, and then more. If you click more, that's where the raise hand button is. And if I'm going to click it right now, is my hand raised?
Yes, I can see
Yes.
it, Julie.
Okay, so if somebody's on an iPad or an Apple product, that's next to participants, there's 3 dots.
Okay.
Click that, you'll see raise hand.
I can see Brent was able to
Yes.
raise his hand. Eric was able to raise his hand. Walter did raise his hand. So I think maybe that's working.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Okay.
Maybe she, okay. All right, thank you then.
I did it by Alt-Y, which I found in some help desk instructions. So that may be a workaround if somebody's on a PC. Alt-Y.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go back to the presentation now that it seems like you do have the ability to raise your hand and ask questions when we get to that point in the presentation. So let's get back to the slides. I'll share my screen again, and let's pick up with the slide that says additional use definitions. We sent something to you yesterday. It's a revised version of the handout that you had already had, most of you. And it was the use matrix and use definitions. And we've revised that since the last handout that you had. And we've added some definitions based on feedback. We've added a definition for airstrip as well as a definition for airport, and they're not exactly the same thing. The airport is obviously the big one that we have. Airstrips can be a private facility for typically small aircraft, and I think we may even have 1 or 2, at least in the, if not in the city limits, elsewhere in Mecklenburg County. So we've added definitions for those, and we've added a definition for crematorium, which we did not have before. We have made an adjustment to a definition that we already had based on feedback. So the old definition was fraternity and sorority. We've added the word facility to that definition so that it's a fraternity sorority facility, just to be clear that it's an actual building that we're talking about and not just simply an organization. However, the actual definition for that term didn't change. It's only the term itself. We've adjusted the name and the definition for what had formerly been known as public utility. We have changed, we've eliminated the word public, and we're calling that utility. And then we've also made some adjustments to the actual definition, which you can see on the screen. The areas highlighted in green are either additions or deletions that we've made. And you'll also find these reflected in the handout that we sent to you via email yesterday. We've also clarified several definitions. So this slide and the following 2 slides will be clarifications, and a lot of these are based on feedback that we received from you, as well as other internal stakeholders. So I'll just go through them. Adult correctional facility, we've added the word residential to clarify that this is a residential facility that we're talking about. Art and fitness studio, we've replaced the term metalsmithing with jewelry making for clarity, I think. Broadcast facility, we've taken out the words commercial and public, and we'll just start that definition with communications facilities. So we're not specifically calling out commercial and communications. For industrial, craft or craft industrial, we've made some deletions there. We've taken out the word small scale, and then we've taken out the last sentence, and we think this just simplifies and broadens that definition a bit. For passenger terminal, we've added some wording to the end of that to hopefully clarify what we mean by that. So not only is it just a facility for the assembly and dispersal of traveling passengers, we've clarified it by saying by means of intercity rail, bus, or other mode of transit, including offices for such services, and additional uses such as passenger waiting areas, restaurants, and retail establishments. Passenger terminal does not include airport. And we have added, for personal service establishment, we have added bicycle repair shops to the list of examples of what could be a personal service establishment. Solar farm, we have slightly modified that definition to call it a ground-mounted solar array. This was from a comment that we received that said, what about buildings that may lease their rooftop area for people to put a solar panels on the top of their building, in which case that would just simply be a building that has solar panels. It's not its own use. For it to be a solar farm, it is a dedicated piece of land with ground-mounted solar panels and not a building that just has solar panels on the top of it, which would still go by whatever the use of that particular building or structure is. Urban agriculture, we have made some changes to that definition, taking out some phrasing and just doing a little bit of wordsmithing there. So hopefully that clarifies that definition. And then finally, the last definition that we've modified is for waste management facility. We have added hazardous waste as an example of what would be treated or accepted at a waste management facility. And then we have consolidated a definition for dormitory. Previously, we had two definitions for dormitory. One, it was a dormitory dash institutional, and the other was a dormitory dash private. And I know we had some discussion at our last meeting on March 12th about why we needed two separate definitions for dormitory, and we agree. And so we are removing the two definitions and consolidating them into a single definition for dormitory, which is a building intended or used principally for sleeping accommodations, a common kitchen, and common gathering rooms for social purposes may also be provided. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Laura and our consultants, Chris and Arista, to talk about, we've had several comments on specific uses, and so I'm going to ask them to speak about what our approach is going to be for these, for the three uses that you see on your screen.
Yeah, and just before Arista and Chris jump in, just to remind you guys, or in some cases you may not have seen these comments, for housing, we talked about alternative types of housing, and you might note that we haven't necessarily added those definitions in, and I think there's a really good reason, not that we're not going to be dealing with those. We also had questions about why the length of the definitions of adult uses. And finally, as drones are becoming more prominent, a few different folks asked if we should have some uses related to drones in here. So with that, Arista and Chris.
Okay. Pardon me. So in terms of housing uses, we saw a number of comments that referred to different types of housing, such as a co-housing structure or things that may be more like a cottage court or pocket neighborhood, as well as, you know, kind of issues that come up with the idea of maybe tiny houses as part of a development. And so we want you to know that we have had these kind of in the forefront of our minds as we've been drafting districts for a while now. They're not uses, they're not technically part of the use table, but they are a development type because they have standards related to kind of how they're laid out, how the courtyards are, how you may be able, say you're doing a tiny house development, may be able to make the lot sizes smaller. So they're really going to be incorporated into the various district standards that address these different types of development, because they're really, for the most part, kind of single family developments. So the idea here is how do you lay out the single family? So the comments that we're receiving, these are things we have been thinking about. These are things that we are planning to incorporate. You're just not going to see them within the use table. You're going to see them in a different section of the UDO. And I don't know, Chris, if you have anything to add on that one before the next.
No, I think that was perfectly clear. Yep, to me.
Okay. The next one, the spiciest of the ones on the screen right now, the adult uses. I know that definition is very long, but it is, however, shorter than the current definition that you have, and it also reflects what the state has defined as adult uses. The idea of this is you need to be very specific on what adult uses are and the different types of adult uses that you may end up having, because if you're not, they can sneak into other areas under other types of uses. So if you don't define adult bookstore specifically, it can fall under retail goods establishment. If you don't define, you know, an adult performance venue, it can fall under live performance venue and end up in a wide variety of districts that you don't want them in. Your definition and the length of it is pretty much what every other city in the country has for an adult use definition. So when that use is defined, it is that specific and it is laid out in that amount of detail. So it is something that we need to have in the ordinance that we shouldn't change. And in particular, it reflects what North Carolina statute defines as adult uses. So you're kind of aligned and consistent with what the state has defined these as. And then finally, drones. We know that they are becoming something that people are talking about, that we're looking at things such as services like drone delivery services, whether that freaks you out or not, but that's something that people have talked about. We have not anywhere seen this as its own separate use. And in particular, if it is something like a drone delivery system, they'll be tied to something else, such as warehouse and distribution. And it's just kind of an ancillary aspect of how that bigger use would function. It's nothing that really exists kind of as its own, as a principal use. It's associated with something. And so again, even just some quick looking around we did, and we know on all the other ordinances that we've worked on recently, this hasn't been singled out as a use at this point. And we don't know necessarily that it's going to be one soon. The thing is, if things change and this does become something that would be the only thing operating on a site, then we'll have to make an amendment. But for right now, and even if you did have something like that, chances are it will fit under another category. And so we don't really see a need to put anything in the ordinance right now regarding drones. And Chris, I don't know if you've got anything to add on this.
No, I would just echo what you said, and just to make it clear that, you know, specifically with the adult uses, that it's the most sort of focused, tame approach that we can put forward that will effectively regulate, you know, that whole set of uses. I know that, you know, there are some people that may be concerned about just having that type of language and that length within the ordinance, and just want to reassure people that it's got to be there, and it's as focused and cooled down as we can possibly get it.
Okay, then this is a part where we can stop And I will stop sharing my screen and we'll take your feedback and questions, and hopefully we will be able to do that fairly smoothly. So if you do have anything that you want to ask or comment on what we've covered so far, please try to see. We have a couple of hands going up. So I will take them in the order that I see them. And Nancy Wiggins. Nancy?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. The only question that I have, when you were talking about the different houses and housing types, from the ones that are single family versus and the ones that have share a wall, and also the tiny homes. The one thing that I see, not just here in Charlotte, but in places like Seattle, I think we need to, even in this, put some sort of prescription of distance for fire reasons or safety reasons, because some of these things get so close that, you know, it would be easy for the fire to jump over and get into the next building or whatever. And that's the only comment that I have.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, we're maybe into the realm of building code and fire code when it comes to that kind of building separation, more so than zoning ordinance, which we do typically defer to building and fire codes for that kind of issue. Anybody else want to say?
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
The other part of it, yeah, fire code and building code do set out kind of how far things need to be. In addition, when we're looking at that, in particular, the zoning district standards for, say, single family neighborhoods, we do have side yard setbacks that we're going to need to establish between buildings. So it may be not just, we may need to take a look, and I have no answers on what those numbers are, but, you know, if fire code says a 10-foot separation is needed based on your wall rating, it may be that we still don't want houses that close together and the side yards would push them further apart. It's not really a use standard, it's a district standard, and that will be coming up down the line.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, because I have seen it not done very well in other communities where really houses were very expensive, et cetera. And I just, with the potential of fires and other things that we have going on these days, I think it's just a reasonable thing to be conscious of those issues when we set those, to make those setback rules, okay?
Okay. Walter?
Yeah, Alan, I had a question about your utility definition.
Yes,
it specifically excluded telecommunications, and I understand that. But very often telecommunications facilities co-locate on utility structures. Does the definition need to acknowledge that in some fashion?
Yeah, Arista?
I'm just raising my disappearing hand. I'm magical. The standards for that would be included within the conditions for telecommunications. So essentially there'd be standard in there that talks about co-location, and that co-location could actually occur on existing utility poles. So it's covered in the conditions for wireless telecommunications. Public utility, it wouldn't be excluded. The way utility is written would not exclude that possibility.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I did see Rebecca. Rebecca, I'm going to call on you next.
Yes, it's sort of small, but under the definition of cemetery, I've dealt with columbariums in the past, and it isn't very defined. I don't know if Arista is used to seeing that defined because they often are within a church building structure or out in the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, if usually we typically consider it as part of it, but we can, I'm trying to pull up the actual definition. I don't know, did we include it in there? I'm sorry, guys, I don't have it open on my desk.
No, we didn't. We have a new definition for crematorium, but we didn't call out the definition for cemetery, and I don't believe we've got a separate definition for columbarium.
So usually what we do is usually add columbarium to the cemetery definition, and then if we need to define it further, it would go into the general definition section, what a columbarium is, rather than called out as a separate use.
Yeah.
To follow up on that too, it looks like our definition of cemetery, we say land and structures reserved for the interring of human remains. We can just make that more clear that that definition would include columbariums if they're out in the landscape as part of the cemetery. I think if they're, inside another structure like part of a church, then that's not something that we would really define as one of the uses.
Right. We are coming toward the end of our presentation, so if you have a question and you haven't raised your hand yet, this is your last chance. We said we wanted to, and let me just jump in here, and while you're thinking about that, we did have an online poll where we asked you what your preferences were for a meeting format, as well as the day of the week and the time. And this time, which was our old time, seemed to work best for most people. The majority of you wanted a live presentation versus having us do a narrated presentation and send to you ahead of time. Some of you did want that, but more of you wanted this type of a presentation. We did want to limit our virtual meetings to an hour. That was the overwhelming preference for you. We've covered this material pretty quickly. Granted, we haven't broken a lot of new ground because we've seen a lot of this in our last meeting, but we did want to follow up and make sure that you understood how we've handled the comments and what we've done with them. So if this is a meeting format that you just didn't particularly care for, that could be a comment. If you thought this went well, please raise your hand and give us that kind of feedback, as well as any feedback that you may have had on the actual content of the meeting. Seeing no hands go up, we can continue.
Nancy Wiggins.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry,
I
Nancy.
like it.
Okay.
Alan, before we move on, we had someone join us by phone, just so that we're tracking who's here at the meeting, so forth, just like we would in person. Could I just ask, if I call up their phone number and ask them to just let us know who it is? It's 704-654. And I've unmuted them.
Did they leave? No, they're here.
7. If that's your phone number and you called into the meeting about 20-30 minutes ago. Okay, well, we don't know who that is. All right.
All right. Well, it's good seeing everybody, if only by computer screen. I'm going to continue on with the last couple of slides, and then we'll wrap up with some words from our director, Taiwo. So let me get back to our screen. So I'm going to ask Laura to cover this slide and what happens next.
Sure. So any additional feedback that you guys have on the uses, if you could mail them to Alan no later than Wednesday of next week. And then we're going to put this aside, not to say that as we learn more, we won't make some additional changes, but we'll be moving on. Our next meeting will be in 2 or 3 weeks. We will get back with you on the date of that. And we're going to actually start moving into zoning districts with 3 industrial districts at the next meeting. They'll be based on the industrial place types, and we'll have that information for you guys as well. And we will be sending some additional materials to the OAC in advance of the meeting, particularly probably some kind of high-level explanation of the 2 industrial place types that the districts will be based off of. We know, I have a note that Walter has raised his hand. And trying to get down to where he is.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I just wanted to get a clarification. All of what we've been working on here with this list and these revisions, the last meeting and today's meeting, are about definitions including in the TOD district and the industrial districts. This is not intended to be the entire definition list for the ordinance. Is that correct?
No, it is intended to be the entire definition list for the ordinance.
Okay, so these are all the definitions that the new ordinance will contain.
That as we may learn as we move forward, or someone may identify some uses that are missing, but at this point, this is our anticipated comprehensive list.
Okay, thank you. I was a little confused.
No, that's a good question. Thanks for asking that.
I'm interested though. Let me press Walter a little bit. What do you think? You want to suggest something? Oh, I'm just trying to.
No, I don't have a suggestion regarding this. We've discussed it twice now, and I see some changes that were made. Somewhere along the line, I got the idea that these were changes or amendments to definitions that applied in the TOD. I guess I didn't grasp that this is the entire definition list for the entire new ordinance, subject to minor additions or corrections as we go. But this is it. This replaces the 500 and some definitions that were talked about a little earlier. And so I just wanted to be clear on that now when I open an ordinance in the future, this is the sum and substance of all the definitions in the ordinance.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
And I believe Nancy may have had her hand raised again. So Nancy, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering how we're going to encapsulate or describe entertainment venues. And I mean that, everything from amphitheaters and sports complexes to the Spectrum Center and the ballparks and so on. Is there not anything in the ordinance that specifically talks about those versus everything else?
There are. I'm gonna maybe ask Arista and Chris if they want to jump in. If you look through that list of uses, you'll see a number of different types of entertainment uses in there. And so we think we've got that covered. Again, this is going to be something that as we go through this, we may find like we added a few uses this go round. As we go through different districts, we'll probably find there's some things to add. But Chris, Arista, anything you want to say about those uses?
Yeah, just to say, there's a couple of them in there right now. Things like outdoor amusement facility would cover things like an outdoor music venue. Even in some cases, indoor amusement facility would cover, say, larger stadium type uses. We do have a live performance venue in there that covers kind of the ones that are a little bit more local that you would see in kind of your commercial areas. And in addition, what we've carried over, you saw it initially in the TOD district, and now it's being covered, it's being carried over into here, and we'll revise it as we need it, is the accessory outdoor entertainment use that is part of the current ordinance that we brought over into TOD and have now brought over more generally. So there's a number of different ways live entertainment is handled based on the scale and kind of the way it's set up. the way that the venues are set up. We think we're pretty well covered for right now, but as Laura said, as we go through it and we start looking at different districts, in particular the commercial areas, it may be that we need some more definitions, but it's really all, at least the base, the start of it is in there right now.
Yep.
Thank you.
I would say too, we did have discussions about, particularly this list of entertainment uses and live entertainment venues and so on, and discussed a number of facilities and different places within the city just to see if we were kind of if we had a series of definitions that were really kind of spanning what we understood as the range or the sort of the broad categories of entertainment uses within the city. And we think that we're getting it right now, but if at any point you all can think of any that might not fit under these, or as we're moving forward, if we come across something, these can be expanded or edited.
Thank you.
I see that Walter has got his hand up again. So Walter?
Yes, I was curious and about this being the sum and substance of the definitions. If you look at the definition for the term quarry, it's well written and it certainly includes what a quarry is, but it is very common. In fact, almost every quarry that I'm familiar with in the local area also includes an asphalt plant. An asphalt plant is not defined separately, nor is it defined as something that would be included as part of a quarry. So I guess for Chris or Arista, how would we manage that in the future? I have represented a couple of quarries in the past, and they all have asphalt plants. Nor do I see a definition of an asphalt plant if it was a separate freestanding facility that was not part of a quarry.
Well, to address that's kind of two separate questions. Kind of as we talked about, kind of going to a more general use approach. If you had a standalone asphalt plant, we wouldn't call it out on its own. It would be part of the heavy industrial category, which is typically where you place those because of their impacts. So it's really, it's into that, it's part of that definition. When we do quarry, I've never done an ordinance yet to date that doesn't have prescribed conditions attached to it, because it is such a big use that typically has a lot of impacts. And even if those are just clear references to kind of state or environmental things, oftentimes within the prescribed conditions, rather than call asphalt plant out separately as a use, we put in the prescribed conditions that it can have an asphalt plant, and then usually putting some setback requirements attached to that if that's part of the quarry use as well. So it really falls under, it's not that we're not allowing them, it's a heavy industrial use if it's standalone, and then it would be part of the conditions for a quarry if that's, if it is part of that. It doesn't have to be, but if it is, then it's got standards attached to it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and just to follow up, I've called up the definitions, and it's actually, we're calling it industrial comma general, and I believe we don't have something for heavy industrial. We're calling it general industrial, and it would seem to fit with that definition.
Right, I apologize. I meant general. I didn't remember. I don't have it called up on my screen, so I didn't remember if we called it heavy or general.
No, but it's general, but I agree that it would probably, it'll definitely fall in that definition. I'm not seeing any additional hands, so I'm going to advance the slide and ask Taiwo to give us some closing remarks, and then I believe we'll have completed our first virtual OAC meeting.
Well, thank you to all of you. We started, I was looking here, we started with 57. Obviously, that's impressive. And right now we are on 54, so definitely full attendance. I want to thank Mayor Pro Tem for joining us today, Julie Heisel. But I also noticed that we have a couple of planning commissioners as well. So thank you so much to all of you for taking the time to join us. I want to thank Tony as well, for our chair, for his opening remarks. Well, I really want to say thank you to staff. They've worked so hard over the last few weeks to see how we can continue in a virtual format without missing a beat. Like Laura said, maybe so far, maybe minimal impact to our schedule. We don't know what that looks like yet, but we will continue to engage. What we do not want to do is to rush this process, but we also want to make sure that we take a lot of things into consideration so that whatever we deliver at the end of the day, you are aware of this. There's a connectivity between this and our comprehensive plan. And so I think having you, I think we have until April 29th to provide feedback to Alan. So please take a good look at this. We live in a new world right now. There is no getting back to normal. Everything is going to be different as we look, especially with the built environment. I want you to really help us with your thinking cap on with regards to how we treat this. Be mindful that the UDO is not just about the building, but everything associated with the environment we live in. Sidewalks, the streets, the different regulations and ordinance. So please take a good look at open places, open spaces, plazas, and all of that. So please take a very good look at this and provide us with your comments as always. The CMGC, the Government Center for the Foreseeable Future, will continue to be close to the public. So it looks like this is going to be the way we will operate over the next several weeks. If anything changes, we definitely will let you know. But I apologize that we were not able to deliver lunch boxes to your respective locations. I know it's lunchtime, but you know, we will definitely make up for that next time that we have the opportunity to meet in person. Again, I don't know when that will be. But in the meantime, as you read different articles that are out there right now with regards to post-COVID world, as you talk to other folks in the community, as you hear different things that we need to be mindful of, please let us know. A comprehensive plan, on the other hand, and I know Alicia is on, is moving on a good path. We actually are going to be releasing some information tonight to 300 and so ambassadors and advisors. You don't have to be an advisor or ambassador to participate. We've developed 3 or so different webinars that you can actually participate on. So if you go on the Charlotte UDO website, there will be a link to the comprehensive plan website as well, or you go straight to the website for the comprehensive plan. We've developed things that can really engage you over the next few weeks as well. So as we set up the meeting for the next 2 or 3 weeks, hopefully we'll have opportunity for you to give us your thoughts and ideas as well, like we've done today. Thanks to our consultants, Chris and Arista, for really shepherding us through this process. So again, thank you so much. We will continue to communicate with you without overloading your email inboxes. But please, whenever you see something from us, you have questions, please do not hesitate. I know you could be doing a whole lot of other things right now, but thank you for staying engaged. I will stop there. I see John Morris has his hand raised, but that's it from my end. So John.
Quick question, Ty, more general. Anything from y'all's perspective at the city as to what the governor might be saying this afternoon with regards to stay at home? Have y'all heard any rumors?
Well, what I know for a fact is that he's going to follow what the president said in terms of phased reopening. So not all at once. And so what will that be? I sense that schools will be closed for the rest of the year. That much, I think, may be coming out. We've always said that as a government building, we were never closed. So it's not about reopening the CMGC. We continue to function, working in different locations. However, whatever the governor announces today might affect how we return to work in terms of gradually over time. So our permitting folks continue to operate. If you talk to Laura and Dave, they will tell you that we have not seen a letdown in rezoning activities. They continue to come in. And so, but whatever he announces, we have to take a look at that as to how do we respond to that. But I can tell you that it's going to be about schools and also about gradually reopening in a phased manner. Any other questions for us before we go? Well, it's 12:40. You've got about 20 more minutes to have lunch. All right, then. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.